Now, in recent years, the dynamic growth of China and its impact on the wider world has been occupying the minds of business people, politicians and academics. In this Olympic year, Warwick ICAST presents a series of perspectives from the university's China experts, each exploring a different aspect of the China story. To begin the series, the Department of History's Dr. Christian Hess gives us a sense of the historical context.
With the Beijing Olympics upon us, global interest in China is at an all-time high. As a historian of modern Chinese history, this certainly is an exciting time. But is this interest in China anything new, or has it been going on for centuries? I would argue that the recent media focus on China is more a rediscovery of the country. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, China occupied a central part of global history. Missionaries and traders flocked to the country in hopes of finding resources, economic markets, converts, and China's ports thrived with this trade. Many of the changes that we see in China occurring over the last several decades are indeed stunning. I always tell my students, if I haven't gone to Beijing for more than a year and I go back, it's as if the entire city has changed. This type of change is highlighted when you look back at the last decades of Maoist China. When you look at the reform era, for example, under Deng Xiaoping's reforms, there's an emphasis on capitalism, there's an emphasis on marketization of China, all of which is a vast change from what we saw under Mao. The reform era does seem like a radical break from that time. And in looking at it that way, you definitely see a new China. The China we see today, while certainly full of new features, doesn't necessarily represent a clean break from the past. In fact, many of the legacies from the 20th century still circulate today. Take, for example, imperialism. Now, certainly, China today is not a victim of imperialist power, and that's one of the reasons why its economy is doing so well. But those legacies still remain. The city that I study, Dalian, is looked on as a major global center for trade at this time. And when they talk about globalization, it's a bit of an uneasy term for them, because for 40 years this city had been a Japanese colony. And in the era of global development, globalization, Dalian has been invested in heavily by Japanese companies, and it's certainly something that makes that city an economic powerhouse today. But for people living there, there's a bit of a political tension with that. On the one hand, economically, they celebrate these links with Japan as what puts this city on the cutting edge of technological developments. But politically, there's great sensitivity with the Japanese imperialist past. And how do you come to terms with that? And will it begin to drag on the developments we see in a place like Dalian? Secondly, you have the legacy of revolution, and specifically what has happened with this. Begins in 1911 and continues all the way through the 1950s and 1960s. But the reform era that we see today has in large part been a dismantling of many of the features of the revolutionary state of the 1950s and 60s. So under Maoist China, for example, there was a great emphasis on ideology, on possessing the right ideology as an overriding factor in any other kinds of development. Deng Xiaoping's era, after Mao's death in the late 1970s, early 1980s, completely reverses that and re-emphasizes expertise, technical know-how. He has a famous sentence where he says, "I don't care what color the cat is, as long as it catches the mice." And there he's specifically referring to Maoist-era policies which emphasized ideological correctness. Certainly Deng Xiaoping's rise to power was very much based on taking apart many features of the Maoist period. But historians, too, are part of this process in looking for answers to understanding what's going on in China today, its economic strength, its growth. We seem to have leapfrogged the revolution backwards, and we're looking now at the periods of the 1930s and 1940s when we did see many similarities with China today, a prioritization of urban growth, a developmental state, one which didn't pay particular attention to issues in the countryside. And I think this is going to be a major challenge for the state in the 21st century, is how to recapture bits and pieces of that revolutionary vision without losing sight of where it wants to go economically. China faces several challenges. First, how does it maintain its economic edge in a global world while treading lightly on legacies of imperialism from its recent past? Secondly, how does it recapture some of the social promises it had made under the revolutionary state while maintaining its dynamism in the 21st century? So, as the global media trains its attention on Beijing for the Summer Olympics, it's not without a bit of irony and some tension for China's leaders that an enduring image remains Mao's portrait hanging over Tiananmen Gate.
And the China series continues next week when we'll be speaking to Warwick Business School's Simon Collinson and asking him for his perspective. If you want to find out about any of the research being carried out here at the University of Warwick, then visit the university's website. That's warwick.ac.uk. In the meantime, thank you for watching. See you next time.